Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Very, very much appreciated. I have some comments that I haven't caught up with as yet, so I will endeavour to do so as soon as possible. So, please keep your comments coming. Right, so this week's episode of the show, as you can see from the title page, I'm taking a look at the Dornoch Distillery in the Highlands of Scotland, and it's mainly because there's several viewers and friends that are big fans of the distillery and kindly sent me samples. So I'd just like to say a big thank you to Ian Sunderland, Zander Cook, and to James Burgoyne. Also got some samples from Richard Hall as well, but unfortunately I'm not actually using those samples in today's episode of the show, but I'd still have them and they may well appear in another episode of the show. You never know. As you probably may well remember, but if you don't, last year I did an episode of the show on the Thompson Brothers independent bottlings. Now the Thompson Brothers obviously own and run the Dornoch Distillery, so it was episode 542. So if you haven't watched that one, just pop back. I kind of briefly spoke about the distillery then, although obviously the focus of the episode was on their independent bottlings rather than on their the distillery bottlings, and obviously at the time I didn't have quite enough samples, but now you guys have kindly sent me the samples, including a sample of new make, which is really cool, and it allows, I mean, as I've often said, it's always great to taste new make spirit. It's the DNA of a distillery. It tells you everything you want to know, and I think part of the reason why that the distillery has gathered such a sort of like a geeky following, shall we say, is the fact that it's a small distillery, and you kind of feel that if you're buying a bottle from a small distillery like Dornoch, you're kind of supporting the small guys. Well, you are supporting the small guys when you're buying distillery, supporting them against the larger industry, and keeping this kind of cottagey sort of industry sort of turning over. Also, one of the other factors that makes the distillery so appealing is their complete transparency with regards, relative transparency, shall we say. Each of the bottles has the information on the back label, including the barley type, the yeast type. I mean, they use an inordinate amount of different mixes, and we'll obviously go into those as we go along. And obviously the cask type, and each of the bottlings they do is a single cask bottling. Again, really intriguing stuff. I mean, it's when you have a distillery that small, you can easily do that, and it's kind of almost the sort of Raymond Armstrong mentality. When Raymond was running Bladnoch, it was a case of, we've run out of 10-year-old Bladnoch, right, I'll go and bottle a cask of 10-year-old Bladnoch. It was the sort of, I suppose, the laws of economy, I guess. You didn't want to bottle too much all in one go, but once you sort of like ran out of one, you could just pop into the warehouse and do another bottling. Obviously with Dornoch and their use of octaves, that's pretty easy to do. Each octave probably doesn't yield much more than 100 odd bottles, I suppose. Another nice thing about the bottles, as you will see from the labels, they are all different, they're all unique, have different pieces of artwork on them. I'm assuming they're created by Scottish artists and what have you. I don't know exactly, but they're all quite unique, quite different, and like I said, it's all about sort of supporting the small guys at the end of the day, which we should all do, really. These large multinational corporations and big behemoths make vast amounts of money. Support the small guys, because they're the reality, the lifeblood of any industry, and not just the whisky industry. Anyway, if you want any further information, obviously there's a link in the box below to the Dornoch's distillery's website. As I've got quite a lot of samples, they're all cask strength, lots of information on each of them to impart. I'm just going to sort of crack on and introduce today's lineup. Right, okay, so obviously we're going to start with a new make. A big thank you to Zander for that particular sample. This is basically been made with organic floor malted Archer barley. They've used spent brewer's yeast, which is a bit weird. I'm not a brewer, obviously, and I'm certainly not an expert on yeast, but one imagines that spent yeast is basically yeast that's given up the ghost, I guess. I can understand why they use a 7 to 10 day fermentation on that, because basically the yeast isn't going to be very active. And it'll be interesting to see what type of new make that actually sort of creates. Obviously you would expect a fermentation of that kind of length of time to give you this wonderfully estery, fruity new make, but because it's spent yeast and because it's taken so long, I mean, there is a certain point that all these flavours appear in during the fermentation. Certainly when I've spoken to distillers before, there's kind of, for each different distillery and each different distiller, there's a kind of like an appoint point, if you like, for the fermentation to stop. And once you kind of get through that sort of real fruity estery thing, things kind of dropped off again, sort of. So to be honest with you, once you've gone over about 120 hours, I suppose, it's questionable what else you kind of get from the fermentation. Obviously, those that know more information about sort of fermentations that would be able to tell me that. But anyway, it does seem to me that I think maybe that's too long fermentation. No? Anyway, well, we'll find out. We'll see what the taste is like. That sample was bottled. I think it was made available in 2019. Interesting that. Then we're going to move on to, now like I said, because the casks, all the bottlings are single cask bottlings, I've opted to do them in kind of cask number range, but from a flavour perspective I would have probably done the first one at the end, because this is cask number 1, which is the weird outlier from their entire range, because this was basically a first fill Oloroso cask, I'm assuming an octave, whereas all the other bottlings are bourbon octaves. So not quite sure why they went with this one to start off with, and don't appear, I mean, I haven't read their entire list of bottlings, so I don't know whether they have done some sherry releases subsequently. That I couldn't say, but it does seem to be a bit of an odd one to start with. Anyway, the barley for cask number 1 was organic Plumer Archer, obviously not floor malted. They used brewer's yeast mix A. I don't know what that is, but they all seem to be different, apart from obviously 1 and 2, both cask brewers mix A. Like I said, it's first fill Oloroso cask. It was distilled in July of 2017, bottled in 2020, 3 years old at 59.4%. Now we get onto the sort of like their general, they seem to be bottling at 5 for the it seems to be the age that they kind of like. Now the thing is, of course, as we well know from aging in small casks, is that it imparts a lot of wood character very quickly, because obviously you have a large surface area of spirit to wood, whereas obviously in larger casks you get less of that. But of course the key here is that people think it's accelerated maturation, which is complete nonsense, because it isn't. Maturation is completely different from wood character. So the point is, you can have a spirit that's got quite a lot of wood character but no maturation, or no maturity I should say. So it'll be interesting to see at 3, 5, has the spirit sort of shaken off that sort of any element of off the still character. But we shall see whether the new make has that kind of character. So it's all going to be really, really intriguing, I think. So like I say, bottling number 2 is a 5-year-old, first fill bourbon octave number 2, again Plumage Archer brewer's mix A. Don't know how long it was fermented for. Distilled in July of 2017, bottled in August of 2023. Lost way around there. Yes, bottling number 4. Bottling number 4 again is another 5-year-old, first fill bourbon octave number 33. 2023. Again, Plumage Archer barley. This time Brewers Mix C was the yeast. Now, like I said, I have no idea of the differences between them. Distilled in October of 2017, bottled in February of 2023 at 58.2%. Bottling number 5, which came from James, is another 5-year-old. This is going back to the new make. This is floor malted Plumage Archer barley. Brewers Mix C again, 288 hour fermentation, and this is cask first of all bourbon octave 57, distilled in January of 2018, bottled in October of 2013 at 50.5%. Now I always like to finish on a peated one, and unfortunately they don't do a peated malt. Maybe they will at some stage, who knows, maybe they'll do a sort of like a peated octave finish, maybe, I don't know, that would be intriguing, I think. So basically the final bottling again is a 5-year-old, first fill bourbon octave number 64, again floor malted Plumage Archer, this time Brewers Mix F. However many different brewers mixes are there? I have no idea. Again, a long wort fermentation, 240 hours or 10 days. I mean, that's immense. I mean, like I said, I mean, you know, one considers sort of 120 hours to be relatively long. I mean, 90 hours is sort of, you know, moderate, I guess. So I mean, that's insane. And that, again, another wonderful thing about the distillery is that kind of fermentation length. So distilled in March of 2018, bottled in June of 2023 at 54.1%. So one's butt is full. Oh. And we'll kick off with a bit of new make then. Right, okay, so let's see what the new make gives us. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Very creamy. It's got an almost kind of wheaty kind of character. It's kind of quite full and fleshy and wheaty. There's not as much esters as I was expecting. Well, because I probably wasn't expecting quite so much. Right, okay, so let's see what the new make is like. Very clean, lovely clean nose. Quite wheaty in actual fact. Quite slightly starchy, very big, very full. There's a little bit of estery fruit, a little bit of apricot, apple, a little bit of pineapple, but not a huge amount. And like I was saying earlier, I think that's basically because the fermentation has gone beyond where all of these kind of big fruity esters kind of come out. There's a very little off the still notes, very little sulfur, very little impurities. Like I said, it's really clean, and I can see why they've opted to bottle this at sort of such a young age. It doesn't need really the time in the cask. And this is the sort of the modern, I guess, the modern way of distilling. You know, get your nice, clean, fruity, estery new make, bottle it when it's quite young. But that's a lovely nose. That is really, really appealing. There's a smidge of citrus possibly, but it's mainly about that kind of starchy, sort of wheaty, sort of barley character. Let's see what that's like. Again, lovely. Bit masked, obviously. It is 60% after all. More minerals, and got that slight sort of granity, highlandy note sort of in the aftertaste. But again, it's very soft. It's very wheaty. It's very full, fleshy. Again, sort of subtropical fruits, a little bit of apricot, some nice barley notes, smidge of off the still notes. But again, really, really clean and just an all-round lovely spirit. It has to be said. Let's see what a little drop of water does to it. Now that's freshened it up a treat. I'm getting a lot more citrus. I'm getting a lot more highland minerality. A There's maybe an almost sort of botanical note hiding there in the background. Less full, less fleshy, less wheaty. Mind you, that kind of starchy wheatiness has almost sort of turned into a slight breadiness. Not as much as Ben Nevis, but a little bit of a breadiness, it has to be said. Again, lovely complexity to the spirit, it has to be said. Let's see what that's like. Again, more citrus, more minerality now. Maybe not quite so complex. Fresher, less full, less starchy. A little bit of bitterness right on the aftertaste, but again, really clean. Not getting a great deal of off the still character. It's a pity that I don't have a sort of a cask sample that actually is effectively from this new make, but you know, it kind of sets out obviously where the distillery is, and I'll be interesting to see what of that kind of, what of character that is in the new make kind of follows through into the actual final spirit, for want of a better word. So yeah, nice starter. Right, okay, so cask number 1, the inaugural bottling. So first fill Oloroso. You know what, I'm not getting a great deal of Oloroso, it has to be said. I mean, there's some, for first fill, I'm really quite surprised. I mean, there's a little bit of dried fruit, but mainly American, I'm guessing American vanillins. Possibly this was an American oak cask, maybe. But anyway, what of the new make am I getting here on the nose? I'm getting the granitiness, I'm getting the citrus. It's got a youthfulness, there's a little bit of sort of rose petally note. That sort of slight boiled sweet kind of subtoshan kind of note happening. Clove oil, cinnamon, spice, lot of oak, but it's balanced. I mean, I will say this is balanced. I'm certainly getting the spirit character, as you know, I've just tasted the new make, so it's kind of fresh in the mind as for what I'm looking for, and I'm getting the oak. So overall, I can't argue with the balance of this at all. Anyway, let's see what that's like. Quite spicy, more oak on the palate, more spices, almost oriental spices, pepper. There's a little bit of citrus, a little bit of minerality. The alcohol is kind of masking the finish. It's very intense. Yeah, I'm getting a lot less spirit character on the palate. Let's put a little drop of water with it and see whether that brings out, just kind of knocks the oak back a little bit. Doesn't really do that on the nose. It's kind of, it kind of makes it feel a little bit more STR like, getting that sort of distinct STR kind of chocolatiness. It's a lot more woody, a lot less about the spirit. Torn here, it has to be said. I love the nose without any water. Anyway, let's see what that's like. There's a little bit more of that minerality. It's softer. It's obviously tamed the alcohol a little bit, so it's not quite so intense on the palate. Really peppery finish. Again, that oriental spice. There is a bit of minerality. There is a bit of citrusness. So yes, if you know what you're looking for, you can pick up on the distillery character. But at the end of the day, that is very, very heavy on the oak. Right, okay, so let's move on to cask number 2. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Okay, so I'm certainly getting the fleshiness, that sort of almost wheatiness that I found on the new make. There's a lot of creamy oak, there's tight tannins, there's an almost kind of grainy, sort of rummy, coconutty sort of note happening here. A little bit of tangerine. Again, this is very, very oak orientated, and I can see the spirit character because I know what I'm looking for. But I think if you didn't know what you were looking for, it's a bit of an oak monster. And this is always going to be the issue with using sort of octave casks, is that you're just going to get a lot of oak. Now, I will say that there's no off note, off the still notes, there's no oiliness, there's no pungency, that the spirit is beautifully clean, but it is really well and truly buried by all this oak. Anyway, let's see what pass on. Chewy, good length, slightly masked but not too much. Maybe that's 58.3, and it doesn't taste like it, which is a bit dangerous. Again, there's a lot of oak, a lot of spiciness, a lot of spice, sort of pepper, oriental spice, touch of minerality, a little bit of citrus, again some touch of barley, but it's all playing second fiddle to the oak. Again, there's that slight sort of graininess, that sort of slight grainy, rummy kind of dried fruit note, a little bit of coconut as well. Interesting. I'm guessing that sort of dried fruit kind of note is oxidation, which is a surprise for a 5-year-old, but then again, this is the thing. Sort of casks do their own thing at the end of the day, yeah, it's enjoyable, but it is very, very oaky. Let's see what a little drop of water does to it. Okay, so that has tampered the oak down a bit. I'm getting more of the minerality and citricness of the spirit, but it's kind of lost a little bit of complexity. A lot of the spice has kind of disappeared, and the oak is kind of a bit sort of homogeneous, not the right word, but it's just kind of a bit vanilla-y and a bit, you know. So it's kind of like you pay some money, you take your choice with this particular cask. Anyway, let's see what pass right now.
Come on.
Again, a little bit more minerality, a little bit more freshness, a little bit more citric notes, a little bit less oak, although the oak has bittered a bit on the finish, which is not an issue. It's adding a little bit of a counterpoint, I suppose. I mean, yeah, it's got a bit better balanced once I put a little bit of water with it, but it's still pretty oaky at the end of the day. Right, okay, so let's move on to the next bottling. So this is Brewer's Mixed Seed Plumage Archer. Now it's interesting because James, in his email, basically said it'll be interesting to see whether you can tell the difference between floor malted and non-floor malted barley. And well, I can't, unfortunately, to be honest with you. The oak is just so intense that is the main focal point, and nuances, obviously there may well be people with a lot more better palate or better nose than what I have that can probably pick up on the difference between sort of floor malted and non-floor malted, but I'm going to hold my hand up and say I can't. But anyway, let's move on and see what this bottling gives us. Big oak, not as spicy, more vanilla. touch of citrus, you know, lemon, lime, a little bit of minerality, but again, we're looking at the oak. And this is the thing, you're going to obviously get differences in oak casks. I don't know whether they make up their own, they probably don't make up their own octanes, they probably haven't made it a cooperage, I would have thought, but so there's always going to be differences, you know, different different distilleries, casks and all that kind of stuff. Not getting a lot of barley, not getting a lot of that estery fruit. It is again very much oak orientated, but doesn't have the spices of the previous cask. It's more vanilla, more custard, that kind of thing. A little bit of dried fruit. There's a little bit of that sort of rumminess kind of happening in the background, but like I said, a lot more. Again, very much about the oak. Let's see what pass on. Now, that's 58.2, and that tastes like 58.2. The alcohol really kind of powers through on the mid palate and just blows the oak completely away. There's a little bit of an off the still note actually coming through on the finish, which was a bit of a surprise because didn't pick that up in the new make. But then again, this is a different new make. This is Brewer's Mix C as opposed to the new make being made from spent brewer's yeast. Kind of wiping out all of that oak really quickly has kind of like given the spirit kind of a chance to show on the finish. I'm getting a lot of minerality, a lot of citrus, a little bit of barley. So to me, more interesting because basically the alcohol has just kind of like gone and pummeled the oak into submission. I mean, the oak is definitely there to start off with, and it just, you get this lovely sort of vanilla-y note to start off with, and then in comes the alcohol and just wipes that away completely, and you are left with distillery character. So in this instance, neat. This has probably been the most intriguing and interesting of the bottling. So this is cask number 33. Not saying it's taken 33 casks to actually get to this point, but you know, it's like I said, every cask is going to be different. Let's see what the nose gives us on this. Again, it's pushing the oak down a bit. I'm getting more of the citric and mineral character of the spirit, and again, but it's also, like I say, it's brought out that sort of off the still oiliness. It's sort of like kind of that's the shame about this. That I'm getting that, you know, I didn't really want that. If I'd have had the lovely cleanliness, I'm not saying it's dirty, but if I'd had the sort of the freshness and the cleanness of the new make coming through without that sort of off the still notes, I'd have been a really happy bunny. But I haven't. I'm getting that off the still character. Sure, pass on. Now strangely, the water on this one has actually emphasised the oak. And here we go. This is the thing with single cask bottlings. I'm getting more vanilla. The distillery character is kind of, the alcohol being softened up is kind of, you know, now given into the oak, if you see what I mean. And I'm not getting a great deal of distillery character. A little bit of spice on the finish. I am getting a little bit of minerality. I think that minerality is something that's obviously, at this point in time, a kind of a given, and as a sort of a constant point of reference with regards to their spirit. The oak is kind of coming and going and all that kind of thing, but the minerality is kind of staying there, it has to be said. Tale of two halves on that one, I think. Right, okay, so moving on to the next bottling. So again, another 5-year-old. This one's actually only 50.5, so it's actually lost quite a bit of its ABV in 5 years. So this is floor malted Plumage Archer. Let's see what the nose goes on this end. I can't smell any barley whatsoever. This could have been made with barley grown on bloody Mars as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I can smell those staves. I mean, it's like literally I've got a wood stave right in front of my face. I mean, I really smell those tannins, and I can smell that wood, and I can smell that bourbon. I mean, that was a bloody active cask. I mean, more so than the others. I'm getting grilled nuts, sweet corn. I'm not getting any iota of minerality or citrus or barley or anything else. I mean, this really is all about the cask. I mean, very clean, very fresh, insofar as fresh bourbon, shall we say, but no real distillery character at all, I'm afraid. This is the octave number 57. Let's see what the pal's like. That's a little bit on the raw side, it has to be said. Again, raw oak, lots of tight tannins. Like I say, it's almost like kind of licking a stave, it really is. I'm getting a bit of minerality, a bit of citrus right on the very end, but it really is pretty raw, it has to be said. Raw as in sort of raw oak, and the spirit is a little bit on the raw side as well. Let's put a little drop of water and see what that does to it. That might have been a little bit too much water. Anyway, let's see what the nose is like. Well, the oak has completely disappeared now. It's kind of left oily and heavy spirit. There's some barley. There's some sort of raw barley. There's a little bit of minerality, but there's quite a lot of off the still oiliness. It's just this particular bottling kind of proves the point that you can that the spirit can pick up a lot of oak very quickly from the octaves, but it doesn't necessarily give you maturity. Let's see what the pal's like. The palate is pretty much the same as the nose. Oak has completely disappeared. Oily young spirit is kind of left, and that spirit doesn't really have the complexity of the new make, which is a bit of a shame, but yeah, there you go, that's that one. That's cask number 57 for you. Right, okay, on to the final bottling of the afternoon. So this is cask 64. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Right, we're kind of a little bit like cask 33 in that it kind of has a lot of that kind of grainy, almost rummy sort of oxidative character. There's fresh pineapple, apricot, grippy oak. The oak is very tannic, it's very grippy, it's not very vanillad. It's again not as spicy as that cask, but it's certainly quite grippy, quite tannic. There's a little bit of citrus, not a huge amount of minerality. It's certainly not got the minerality of some of the other bottlings, and there's a real tightness there, but I'm certainly getting more of a feel for the spirit coming through on the nose on this one, but again I'm having to look through the oak, if you see what I mean. It'll be interesting to see if putting a little bit of water, whether that does really knock the oak back and I get a lot more of the sort of fruit character of the spirit. Let's see what I like. Again, quite oaky. It's a bit reserved. It's a little bit of spices. Not the intensity of, I'm not getting any minerality. I wonder whether that is the yeast possibly. This is Brewer's Mix F as opposed to sort of like some of the other ones which were Brewer's Mix C. Maybe that mix hasn't kind of brought out the sort of citrus minerality. I don't know. Like I say, I'm just guessing here. And the oak is still quite dominant. It's quite spicy and not getting a huge amount of vanillins. I can taste the alcohol in the edges of my cheek. It's 54.1. Let's see what a little drop of water does to this one. Let's see if it makes it any fruitier on the nose. Not really fruitier. It's maybe a little bit floral, possibly. It's oilier. Again, the oak is kind of like pushed down, so I'm getting oilier spirit. Certainly that rumminess, that sort of rummy dried fruit note is certainly noticeable. Again, I'm not getting a great deal of minerality, and I'm not getting a great deal of citrus, and this kind of leads me to think that this kind of citric note is probably tied into the yeast, possibly. I don't know. It's not knowing sort of exactly. I mean, this is the thing. I don't know exactly what yeast kind of. I know what yeast does, but I don't know kind of the ins and outs of it. Anyway, let's see what that's like. Again, slightly more floral possibly, a little less oak, but that oak is bittering quite hard on the finish. The rumminess, that rummy dried fruit note is there again, not very mineral, not very citric, longer. Yeah, I mean, it's nice. I mean, it's a pleasant whiskey, I guess, at the end of the day, and it's just interesting to sort of see that it is quite different from the rest. And that must have something to do with the only difference being, well, obviously you get the nuances of the oak, but the different yeast mix. So. Right, okay, so a big thank you to James and Xander and Ian for the samples for today's episode of the show. Better wrap this up fairly quickly as it's become quite a long episode. So the new make, it kind of obviously, like I said, it kind of gave the sort of bedrock, I suppose, for the character. I mean, I'm not going to go through each individual one, because there was nuances, shall we say, and in some the oak. I think overall, I think the oak is obviously the kind of key part here. The use of the octaves has obviously given the whiskey an awful lot of oak. In some bottlings that oak was more prevalent than others. Sometimes I got the minerality, sometimes a citric note. It does seem to be that the key is the kind of the yeast strain or the yeast mix. Certainly the last one, the Mix F, didn't have the minerality that some of the others, the Mix C, seemed to develop. I don't know. It's just an observation at the end of the day. But I will say it's intriguing. I mean, whether you guys would ever have the opportunity to do this kind of tasting, you know, I don't know what the bottles retail for, but I think it's a really intriguing thing. It's obvious that each release not only is a unique release in its own right, being a single cask. You are kind of playing a bit hit and miss. There is a thread of similarity, but you know, the oak is the kind of the heaviness, and that is the bit that I struggle with here, is the overt oak and the shift of the balance not being quite where I really want the balance to be. Now, obviously this is a decision taken by the Thompson brothers. This is how they're going to do it, and you know, you kind of either buy into that or you don't. For me personally, like I say, I would like to see more balance. I would like to have seen the spirit a bit older. Maybe they've got some, hoggies and so on and so forth in their warehouse. It would be intriguing to see maybe a 10-year-old in a more traditional sort of maturation, just to see where it's at. But for me, like I said, if you like sort of a lot of oak, that's what you're going to get with the Dornoch bottlings. But, you know, a hell of a lot of fun. That's all I can say. Really, really good fun. So, like I said, big thank you to everybody for the samples for today's episode of the show. Hope you've enjoyed it. All I can say is good afternoon and good ramming.